Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Leading the Charge, and welcome to session number 3. This session is a little bit different than the others. There are 2 parts. The first part, we will have a presentation from Edward Arlett, and he will talk about the IESO's energy storage design project. And the second part, we will have a panel discussion on transactive energy, and that will start at 1 o'clock. So I will serve as the moderator for this session. Edward Arlett is the Supervisor of Advanced Technology Research at the Independent Electricity System Operator, or IESO. Edward has been at Ontario's IESO for over 20 years in a variety of roles, including market development, information technology, and smart metering. He currently serves as Supervisor of the Advanced Technology Research Group within the IESO's Policy Engagement and Innovation Division. Edward has served on external smart grid committees and currently serves as chair of the North American ISO RTO Council's Emerging Technologies Task Force. Edward holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Toronto and a Master's of Science in Information Systems from the London School of Economics. On a personal note, I'll also add that it's been a pleasure working with Edward over the past couple of years through the partnership between the IESO and Ryerson in our research. Edward has always shared excellent insights to help shape our work and ensure that our research products are practical and useful. So thank you, Edward. I think you have some slides you'd like to share as well. If you have those ready, you can go ahead and share them and begin whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesse, for that kind introduction. And yeah, let me also share that same sentiment. What a pleasure it has been to work with you and the rest of the team at Ryerson CUE on energy storage, transactive energy, and a number of other topics of emerging interest for us at the IESO. And I'd also like to thank you and Karen, Bala, and the rest of the conference organizers for the invitation to speak today. So Jesse, let me double check, make sure you're able to see my presentation screen now on screen there.
Yes, I can see it. It's perfect.
Excellent.
Yeah,
thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. And I'm going to speak a little bit today on the project that if you were joining us this morning and saw the remarks from our CEO, Terry Young, was speaking to our energy storage design project and some of the other efforts that have been underway here at the IESO for some time in the energy storage space. And I think before I dive into this presentation, I want to acknowledge a little bit of the context of this presentation and the broader NESNet organization. I know that NESNet is a national organization. We have a number of organizations joining us today from across Canada, and it's one of the great things that our company has really enjoyed about that engagement with NESNet to see energy storage playing out in a variety of different jurisdictions and commercial contexts across the country over the past several years. And as many of you already know, Ontario and Alberta are the only 2 provinces right now with an open wholesale market. And it has somewhat driven our approach to energy storage integration and how the solutions that we're putting forward now as a result of the culmination of the storage design project, which we've just completed in the past month. And what I want to say to that is I'm going to try not to make this an esoteric focus on just wholesale markets. I think in many respects, we've learned a lot of valuable lessons from this project that are applicable more broadly across Canada and jurisdictions, including ones with vertically integrated monopolies and utility companies that are both the asset owner and operator of the storage device, but also to focus on the subtle distinction between those different aspects in terms of operational considerations and the investor standpoint and the merger point of those various competing interests with an energy storage asset. And again, many of these topics are aspects which I know NESNet researchers have explored and things that we've benefited from very greatly over the past few years as we've formulated our own solution to the energy storage integration challenge. So what I want to focus on today is the energy storage design project, which has really now been the culmination of a 2-year effort between ourselves and stakeholders here in the Ontario electricity market and stakeholders from outside of Ontario as well that have had a potential interest in either securing assets in this jurisdiction or have otherwise been involved in storage integration across multiple jurisdictions. But even more earlier than the storage design project is we've also benefited greatly, as Terry alluded to in his remarks this morning, from 8 years of preceding field research in various topics of energy storage, which quite frankly have allowed our company to move faster and further on the energy storage file in the past couple of years as a result of having connections through NestNet, the various research projects that we have not only benefited us, but I hope are benefiting the greater industry. We've done an extensive amount of work exploring the revenue stacking problem with Ryerson CUE, and there's a number of published papers which you'll find on the CUE website that we've had the privilege of contributing to and collaborating with over the past several years. In the next few months, we will be publishing a series of papers in IEEE transactions in conjunction with our partners at the University of Waterloo. Our university have been leading the research and developing the paper in those areas. ISO has been very proud to be assisting and in sponsoring, helping to sponsor those papers, which are going to delve into the topics of fast regulation service for energy storage, which has a tangential relationship with what I'm about to speak to today. And we're very excited about the findings of those studies, which we'll be making public in a series of 4 different papers over the next several months going into 2021. But what I want to focus now today is a bit on the storage design project. The real central problem for this project is how do we integrate energy storage into the wholesale market that we have today, the systems platforms that we have today, and then furthermore, how do we potentially want to adapt those system platforms into the future? I think one of the overwhelming pieces of advice and feedback that we've received from the energy storage stakeholder community over the past couple of years is that investors want to get going now, today, with in terms of investments in energy storage in the wholesale markets. And there's been many of you may have caught the essence of some of that with discussion panel 2, which occurred earlier today, which I was watching with great interest, just getting an investor's perspective on the explosion of energy storage growth, not only here in Ontario, but across system operators across North America. The prospective build queue in wholesale markets now in North America is now measured in the tens of thousands of megawatts of prospective projects now waiting to come into wholesale markets across North America. And again, here in Ontario, we've been certainly feeling the impacts of that investment wave here as well, which has been a big impetus behind our more recent efforts through the storage design project. If you go to our website today, what you'll see is our what we call our interim design measures. So these are measures to really, for the first time in 2021, we'll now have a formalized definition of what an electricity storage asset is in our electricity market, how to register it, how to operate it, how it gets settled in our market. And we're effectively grafting energy storage onto the systems platform that we have today. I'll come back to that topic in a moment. And it's a really important symbolic step. We have about 16 pilot project storage facilities in the Ontario wholesale market today. Lots of interest from other prospective projects waiting to potentially put in formal build requests as well. And again, this meets an immediate need that we have while we're putting in place the market renewal project that Terry Young was alluding to this morning. And then the next big phase, of course, is looking beyond 2023, is potentially then a major stepwise change to our systems platforms to then accommodate other physical characteristics of energy storage, like state of charge, for example. And again, the storage design project has put out a long-term high-level design document that we just published in the past few weeks, which describes some of the more aspirational changes that we're looking to potentially implement after 2023 once the market renewal program goes live. And I'll come back to those in just a moment here. But if I summarize just to elaborate on what I was saying earlier, I mean, to summarize, I think it's really been since 2012 at the ISO, we've really sort of jumped in with both feet with energy storage by funding a number of pilot projects at a wholesale market grid scale level in our system. We have a variety of different technologies ranging from battery storage facilities, compressed air, and flywheel energy storage systems that are now connected to the system. As I speak to you this morning, we actually have 3 pilot project facilities providing frequency regulation service to the Ontario power grid, and then the balance of our other storage facilities providing energy arbitrage and other services to the ISO control grid, including reactive support and voltage control. So the past several years, we've been very grateful to have hands-on experience with some of these early mover energy storage facilities facilities. We really are now in a moment now where energy storage is moving past the pilot project early mover stage. Later on in December, our capacity market here in the province of Ontario will be open to energy storage for the first time. And we're very excited about the prospect of more mainstream participation in energy storage outside the ambit of pilot projects as we go forth. And as I mentioned earlier, NestNet has been a really big part of the partnership arrangement that we've had over the past several years, which built up our background knowledge on the capabilities of these facilities and gave us a really good idea of where to start, at least in terms of our design work that played out in the SDP project more recently in the past 2 years. As Terry alluded to in his remarks this morning, we spent a lot of 2018 really going through a very rigorous problem definition exercise to identify obstacles more generally in the province of Ontario faced by energy storage facilities. And I think many of the lessons learned from that problem definition exercise, I think it's probably safe to say are more broadly applicable across Canada. They're certainly not unique to Ontario, describing both regulatory and market barriers at both the retail market level and the wholesale market level. So it was a broad report which included various aspects that are under the IESO's jurisdiction to solve, as well as things that fall into the realm of the regulator and the OEB. And again, I thought the discussion that happened during panel 2 this morning, for those of you who were able to see it, was a really good example of some of the issues and challenges that are faced by energy storage still today here in the province of Ontario. And I think probably have a common theme across Canada about assembling the complete revenue picture for an energy storage facility. How can these very flexible, versatile assets realize revenue streams from both the retail market level and at the wholesale bulk power system level as well? This is really a problem, a messy problem, quite frankly, that spans the jurisdiction of multiple organizations, for everything from the regulatory to market rules to the grid operators and distribution system operators across the country. And I think many of the recommendations in our report, quite frankly, are very broadly applicable to across the country. And I know that our colleagues at Alberta System Operator have recently completed a very similar exercise in Alberta with, again, a lot of very similar themes and issues in their problem definition report as well. So the interim design measures, as I mentioned earlier, are really predicated right now on using the tools platform that we have today in the IESO market. We have a wholesale market that was to the large extent designed in the late 1990s, early 2000s, at a time when I think it's safe to say where non-PGS energy storage was not a going concern, or was still very much an experimental concept and idea 20 years ago. And at that time, we have, for those of you who are familiar with system optimization processes, we have a dispatch scheduling and optimization model of the Ontario Power Grid that is largely predicated on load and generation resources. You would typically, when you register a facility in today's wholesale market, you must pick one lane or the other. You're either a load facility or a generation facility. And what we've tried to do to say is how can we potentially make that current paradigm work as best we can with energy storage, recognizing the limitations that we have with today's tools, to be able to give investors a faster path into the Ontario market with the tools that we have today, understanding that we still have a longer term program to put into play to properly recognize energy storage facilities for what they are. And I'll come back to that longer term vision in just a moment here. But that was a big development for us. We published our design document in February of this year. You can find it on our website in the Energy Storage Advisory Group website. And that has now moved beyond the design phase and is now moving through the formalized market rules approval phase. It's before what we call our technical panel here in Ontario, which is one of the final checkpoints that we have to review those market rule changes. Our wholesale market rules will change pretty much in every chapter, everything from registration of storage facilities, facility operational requirements, submitting bids and offers into the electricity market, financial settlements. Pretty much every aspect of our wholesale market rules will be changing in Q1 2021. And finally, people who are seeking to enter the Ontario wholesale market will have a very clear set of ground rules in terms of how to go about doing that, depending on the size of their storage facility and the type of wholesale market products that they wish to participate in. And then the other prong, as I mentioned earlier, was also to publish a longer-term design vision document. Again, as we mentioned, the ISO right now is very preoccupied with the implementation of the market renewal program. This was an extensive effort. This is actually probably our largest single market development effort in the past 20 years since we first opened the electricity market. The market renewal program was established several years ago, long before we had a storage design project. And as Terry Young mentioned, is bringing a number of improvements, including the institution of a day-ahead market here in the province of Ontario, locational prices, and our capacity auction, which is going into force in December of this year. But once those platform changes are implemented in 2023, of course, where we're now turning now is in a lineup of enabling resources in our tools platforms and from a variety of different technologies, including energy storage. The next set of changes to come in after the MRP program. So the time to start contemplating that is now. And the Energy Storage Design Project high-level vision document is really what sets out our work with stakeholders to say what are the broad strokes of what that next generation of platform changes coming in after market renewal will have to accommodate with respect to energy storage. What are we expecting to see in terms of that boundary line of integrating the physical characteristics of energy storage into the market, but ensuring that it's still participating on a level playing field with the other dispatchable resources that we have from either the generation or load side. So some of you who've been involved in our storage design project will probably be well familiar with this, what I sometimes refer to as a central technical problem to energy storage integration is really what does the mathematical dispatch scheduling and optimization model actually see in terms of an energy storage facility. So I think pretty much most of you at today's conference or on the research side understand the reality of a storage facility, which is that it is a single type of facility that can withdraw, store, and inject energy back into the electricity system. Again, different technologies have different characteristics and capabilities in each of those three categories of injection, withdrawing, and storing. But at the end of the day, that is the reality that we need to represent in a wholesale market. If I want to have a signal of value in terms of when a facility can either inject, store, withdraw, respond to market prices, which change every 5 minutes, provide ancillary services, I need some sort of mathematical model that represents that. On the right-hand side, though, of course, is the dispatch scheduling and optimization engine that we have today. This is the conceptual model that we've now had for well over 20 years in our market, where generator and load resources each have their own distinctive capabilities. There is no notion of energy storage capability or a state of charge model embedded in that model. And what we really have to do, at least at the moment with the interim design, is we have to represent those storage facilities as a combination of generator and load, and very carefully manage those system operations, given that our dispatch algorithm doesn't actually recognize an explicit link between the two. So what we've learned over the past 8 years with our work with the 16 pilot project facilities, NestNet, and so forth, is we have figured out an interim design to make this design work. It involves a very careful management of bids and offers into the electricity market and a number of other interim measures to manage the state of charge aspects of an energy storage facility. Again, probably a lot more details than I can get to in the time for this presentation. But the bottom line is we have something which we think can roughly work for the two facilities. Well, we know it can work because we have a number of facilities today that are already using these arrangements even before the market rules go into force, thanks to some of our pilot projects that we've done over the past few years. But we also know there's a number of inefficiencies that fall out of that as well. When we have a centralized dispatch algorithm that doesn't recognize the storage capabilities of a resource, it's hard to discern when the optimal time is to actually use that stored energy, or when to set aside a storage facility's charging capability to absorb surplus load, and a whole host of other optimization type problems, which quite frankly become a lot easier to solve if the algorithm itself recognizes storage capabilities. So here, I think really an invaluable tool that we've used to help solve this problem with the storage design program was a conceptual model that was developed by the Electric Power Research Institute. I know probably a number of you on this conference today are likely members of EPRI. Certainly the ISO, we've benefited greatly from the EPRI relationship over the past number of years. EPRI is working hand in hand with our US system operator colleagues as they have been implementing an energy storage state of charge model in response to FERC Order 841, which I know many of you are likely familiar with over the past several years, and have really been good at mapping out the solutions-based energy storage integration. And it really sort of spans solutions from the left-hand side of the screen here, where effectively the utility company manages all aspects of an energy storage assets operations, to the extreme right-hand side where the storage facility is largely managed by the storage asset owner. And what we had to do is as illustrated on the slide here, is that there's drawbacks and benefits depending on which end of the spectrum that you manage. If you're a vertically integrated utility where you own and operate the storage asset, this becomes a relatively easy choice. You sort of choose from the right-hand side. Of course, you're going to control the asset that you own and operate, and you use the best informational picture that you have. There is no other interest that necessarily you have to consider. You're optimizing for the use of your own system, asset life cycle, and so forth. But in the context of an open electricity market, we have to balance, of course, the needs of both the asset owner and the broader electricity market. We have multiple parties involved. We have ratepayers who bear the ultimate costs of the decisions that we make as a system operator. We have the reliability imperative of ensuring that we're not dispatching facilities that are charge limited. So we have a reliability concern here in terms of operating energy storage facilities, but at the same time, the asset owner themselves is potentially seeing other aspects of the optimization problem that we don't see as a system operator. And again, I thought today's discussion panel number 2 was a really good example of that, where you potentially have a storage asset playing at both levels of the system, maybe helping a customer mitigate a global adjustment peak, or providing services to a local distribution company, and providing services in the wholesale market, which pretty much guarantees that no one party sees a complete informational picture of the optimization problem. So given all of those competing considerations, where we really landed with the storage design project was sort of an intermediate solution between the two, which EPRI refers to as SOC Management Lite. And what this basically involves is we now have what we're going to eventually institute in the Ontario market is a holistic model of a storage facility that actually has a state of charge capability. So we're finally recognizing the storage facility for what it is a facility that can withdraw, store, and inject energy back into the system with a finite level of state of charge that can actually be seen by our dispatch algorithm. So we'll have an ultimate reliability safeguard to ensure that we don't either dispatch a facility to charge or discharge when it doesn't have the capability to do so. So we'll actually be able to see that within our dispatch algorithm. But at the same time, we're still maximizing the control that the market participant has through bids and offers as to when they actually get called into the market. So this really now puts a storage facility on a very similar footing as a dispatchable generator or dispatchable load in the wholesale market, where they actually signal their price sensitivity through their bids and offers into the marketplace, but also ensures that ourselves here at the IESO as a system operator make sure that we're not crossing that red line there and dispatching a facility that violates the state of charge constraint of a facility. So there's a consideration of the physical capabilities of the facility itself. You'll find variations of this throughout the U.S. wholesale markets, but this is interestingly enough where probably most of the U.S. wholesale markets have gravitated towards as well in terms of their operations. Not necessarily where vertically integrated utility will necessarily land, but I think again a number of the considerations of the revenue maximization model for energy storage still permeate all of these models, whether you're the owner operator of the facility or a market participant in a wholesale market. Ultimately, the common problem at the end of the day is making sure that that asset gets utilized to its maximum capability. The only thing that really drives you to one of these models versus another is what is your informational picture over the asset itself. And in the wholesale market, of course, again, given that no single party has a complete informational picture of the utilization problem, SOC Lite sort of strikes that really critical balance between these types of extremes and where we've landed. And again, our high-level design vision on our website will provide a little more insight into both the nature of the problem and what the solution might potentially look like once we get to putting this into our resource integration strategy over the longer period of time. So Jesse, just to wrap up, I will just sort of reiterate some of the remarks that our CEO was making at this morning's in his opening remarks this morning. Is we've we now have at least a blueprint now for solving the standalone energy storage problem, at least coming into the market. I will acknowledge that throughout the storage design project, we have repeatedly received from our stakeholders a very strong interest in examining behind the meter and hybrid energy storage facilities. This is something that, again, was out of scope of the original storage design project, but something the ISO has acknowledged must be in our longer term roadmap. And you heard our CEO reiterate that in his remarks this morning. And I think the message I really want to leave for NestNet is given the help that we've received on the standalone energy storage problem and the background research and the years of building our knowledge base on the storage integration problem that enabled the STP project to move at the pace it did, is I think what we really want to do is now set a signal to the NestNet community that we are definitely now turning our attention to behind the meter and hybrid storage. It's a major reason why we're now funding a transactive energy research chair at Ryerson University. It's why we're still very heavily engaged with NestNet on the behind the meter storage type problems. And I think it's fair to say the ISO will have a lot more specifically to talk about both of these topics in the very near future. But the dialogue has already really started with NestNet, and many of you are already involved with the ISO through various research programs that we're just beginning to fund or beginning to talk about publicly in this area. And I should note some of the latest stats in the United States show that hybrid facilities now constitute about half of the United States build queue. This has grown in importance at an astonishing pace. And our immediate concern right now is to make sure that we're reacting to this investment trend as fast as we can. And that has not been lost to us in the ISO. And we feel that places like NestNet are a really good starting point. And looking ahead to the problem of integrating mass numbers behind storage, I think is a good segue, Jesse, probably into our next panel coming up later on this afternoon on transactive energy. But with that, Jesse, I'll hand the presentation back to you. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have or from our audience if time allows. And thank you for the opportunity to present today.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Edward, for sharing a bit some of the neat work that's going on at the IESO in finding ways to bring meaningful ways for storage to participate in the markets. We do have one question. Oh, and also a message to all the participants, if you have any questions, there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Please feel free to use that. We have one question so far, and that is, what are the private investment opportunities for energy storage in Ontario?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, again, I think today what we heard in panel 2, I think really is very representative of what we've seen in terms of early mover storage. As we've had sort of the big initial opportunity has been through the Global Adjustment Industrial Conservation Initiative. We have seen probably the vast majority of standalone energy storage projects have occurred behind the meter, often at large industrial commercial sites, have contributed to the peak management problem that the global adjustment tariff represents. I know we're going through a bit of an odd historical period right now with COVID and the temporary suspension of some aspects of that program, but it has spurred quite an investment boom here in Ontario so far. But of course, the question that the storage community has is, first of all, some of that investment boom has been predicated on a government policy decision that can change. Policy does change from time to time. And in addition is, what about the more enduring mechanisms through the wholesale market? And that, I think, has been of high interest to the wholesale, to the energy storage community, to say, how can I potentially take opportunities from global adjustment, things I'm doing at the distribution level to bolster the distribution system or defer asset utilization, and also benefit from participation in the wholesale market. And I think from the ISO standpoint is we've been trying to say all along is we don't have complete control over all of those problems. Some of them rely with both government and the regulators. But what we can at least solve is the wholesale market part of the revenue stacking problem. And that's really been the focus of the STP project over the past couple of years. And I think now we have a path forward to at least allow storage now to say, how can we allow you to participate in every wholesale market category that a dispatchable facility can in the traditional sense? but we still have a big mountain to climb, I think, at the distribution level to be able to say, how can we then put all of the elements of the revenue stack together for one asset? And that still, I think, is the big problem that industry has to solve, not only here in Ontario, but we see this playing out all across North America. Certainly in any jurisdiction where there's an open wholesale market, the wholesale market level is just one strata of the revenue stacking problem that needs to be solved more broadly for energy storage.
Great, thanks, Edward. Oh, actually another one just popped up. Maybe we can quickly answer this in about a minute or so, and then we'll go to a break before the next session starts at 1.
Sure.
But this one is comparing to other energy markets in North America. How do you evaluate IESO market mechanisms?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say right now we've been embarking on a very similar journey to what our U.S. colleagues have been carrying out under FERC Order 841. And for those of you who are less familiar with that, is the U.S. regulator, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has been compelling all U.S. system operators under their jurisdiction to provide equal access to wholesale market participation. And what the FERC order has basically said is that in order to do that, a system operator needs to account for the physical characteristics of a storage facility, recognizing that it has a state of charge capability, and allowing those facilities to participate in every wholesale market product category. And we've really embarked on a very similar path here. Even though we don't have necessarily the regulatory imperative, there's no one necessarily forcing us to do this. We recognize that this is where the investment trend is going across North America. We see the cost of storage falling at an astonishing rate. I know the front page of The Economist just a couple of weeks ago on 21st Century Power gave great prominence to energy storage costs and what's about to come for our industry as this technology continues to fall in price. So we're feeling a broader global pressure. So it's beyond just simply what a regulator is telling us to do. And we see at least the interim measure is basically what we're saying is we're doing as much as we can, as fast as we can with the interim measures that are coming into force in Q1 of next year. But we also recognize that's not enough. That doesn't quite put energy storage on the equal footing that it needs to be. And we want to get to the same place, quite frankly, that our US colleagues are with, and that's really the articulation of the long-term design vision. Just publishing that in the past month, I think has been an extremely important public acknowledgement on the part of the IESO that this is where we're going. It's now, and you heard our CEO make a very unambiguous statement to that effect earlier this morning here, is we recognize that that is a goal. We may not get there tomorrow or next week, but we now have a roadmap to get there that's had the input of the many members of our stakeholder body as part of the storage design project.
Great, thanks, Edward. And yeah, we look forward to what we see in the future with energy storage in Ontario and in elsewhere. So now it's 12:47. We will take a short break to 1 o'clock, reconvene at 1 o'clock, where we will have our panel discussion on transactive energy. It's great. Everyone's here. Welcome back. Actually, this virtual conference, it's a lot easier to bring people back together than when we did this in person before. And we spent a lot of time trying to herd people into the room. But anyway, glad that you're back. Welcome back, everybody, to session 3. And this is a panel discussion on the future of transactive energy. And we are so pleased to have 4 panelists today. We have Edward Arlett again. You've met him already. He's a supervisor for advanced technology research at the IESO. We also have Sarah Griffiths, the director and head of regulatory affairs at NL Group. Hi, Sarah. We have Frederick Morency, who is the vice president of energy and services at Schneider Electric Canada. Hi, Frederick. And lastly, we have Matt Sachs, who's the COO of Peak Power. So welcome, everybody. We're so glad you're here. So this session will be similar to the other moderated sessions. We will have a discussion between the 5 of us for the first part, and then we will also take questions from the audience. So if you can start thinking about your questions and use the Q&A function that's on the bottom of your Zoom window, that would be great. But first, I wanted to give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves and also to give some opening remarks. And in particular, if you could highlight your connection to or your interest in energy storage and transactive energy. So let's go alphabetically by last name. So Edward, if you could start, please.
Thanks very much, Jesse, and good afternoon to all my fellow panelists as well, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Yeah, so I won't go too much in the introductions. Jesse, I think you covered that earlier with my past presentation, and thank you for that. Our broader interest, as Terry was mentioning, on our innovation group at the IESO has been to, again, try and keep our eyes to the edge of the radar screen. We've gone through this 8-year journey on energy storage integration and now have a tangible roadmap and our interim design measures going into force now. But I think it's fair to say the next really big tidal wave that we're sort of have an eye to is mass quantities of distributed energy resources, and recognizing that there's already an almost informal market that's being developed outside of the boundary of the wholesale market. Again, not just here in Ontario, but happening all across North America. And as our CEO was alluding to in his remarks this morning, there's been a significant regulatory development in the United States to more formalize the access of distributed energy resources into wholesale markets. And I think with that comes a huge logistical problem, which again, for those of you that joined or were able to see panel 2 this morning, really caught a glimpse of that, is how do I navigate multiple markets? How do I ensure that if a resource is serving both the wholesale market and the distribution system, and there's conflicting uses of that resource, how does that get mediated? And how does that scale up from thousands to potentially hundreds of thousands and millions of assets down the road as more and more devices get connected to the internet and become controllable? And all of that creates a very large problem space for system operators, market operators, public utility companies, even in a regulated environment. And I think that's our interest in Transactive Energy, is to potentially map out a solution space for managing mass numbers of small resources that can respond to value. And I think that's really where our interest lies in this as a system and market operator.
Great, thanks, Edward. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you for having me, to Jesse and to the organizers. Really appreciate it. I'm here today representing Enel-X, which is the entrepreneurial arm of Enel-X, which is a global company that has generation, distribution, and transmission assets. So they were a traditional energy company, but they noticed they were actually losing their customers. So what they did was they went out and they acquired the largest demand response company in the world, which was Enernoc, a leading storage development company called Demand Energy Networks, and then an EV software and hardware company called eMotorworks to form Enel-X. And they really did form this to try to participate as well as help solve the problems that Edward just articulated, that the ISO is trying to focus with in his opening remarks. So what we do is we assist companies monetize their flexibility. And we do that through accessing wholesale markets, accessing retail programs, retail markets, and through managing traditional demand response, such as load curtailment, and now being able to help them through the with our assistance putting in the behind the meter storage, behind the meter resources to their to mostly commercial and industrial customers, and putting in this behind the meter storage to enable them to continue production while giving that value of flexibility and that value of capacity back into whether it be wholesale markets or non-wires alternatives on the retail level, among many other hopefully avenues of revenue and value.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Frederick, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. So good afternoon, Jesse, and to the other panelists. Very pleased to be with you this afternoon to participate to this panel on the transactive energy. I'm working and representing Schneider Electric, a company that I've been working for the last 23 years. Very proud of working for this company that has really care for sustainability and as well care to empower everyone on the planet to make the most of their energy and their resources. Part of my organization, we're quite passionate about microgrid solution, and that's something that we've been offering across North America and in Canada, in which we have seen many great emergence of building up a more sustainable infrastructure for our customer. And I'd like to say that there is no transactive energy without microgrids. So, and we've seen, as I said, in the last 5 years, a clear increase in demand from our customer that are building their sustainability strategy to have options on how they can integrate other source of renewable energy. And the key here is to make sure that the microgrid solutions are creating a stable infrastructure to deliver the outcome desired by the customer. But then it does, with the emergence of digital technology, create a lot of space to being able to use that energy flexibility to contribute for the greater good of our society and our electrical infrastructure. So very pleased to be participating and engage with the discussion this afternoon.
Thanks, Frederick. Matt, would you like to go?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jesse. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Matthew Sachs. I'm the COO and one of the co-founders of Peak Power. So Peak is a Toronto-based software company. We develop the software controls to more efficiently operate distributed energy resources in the grid. So we have solutions for buildings that includes an IoT based advanced energy dashboard that forecasts how the building is going to behave, and we can send notifications on the operator how to adapt the operation to either conserve energy or adapt to demand prices, or just generally operate the building more efficiently. Our core product is software controls for battery energy storage. So we have a no cost option, and we also license our software to other developers in other markets. And on the more innovative side related to transactive energy, we're involved in using electric vehicles for vehicle to grid. We have one of the world's largest demonstration projects of this technology right here in Toronto, and also working with the IESO through a pilot project funded by the federal government on looking at how distributed energy resources can participate in ISO administered markets. Generally, we see ourselves, or our mission is to try and create that software platform that allows simple integration of distributed energy resources into the smart cities of tomorrow. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Matt. Thank you all. I thought it would be good to kick off our discussion with at least a working definition for transactive energy, since that seems to mean different things to different people. So if one of you would like to share what you think transactive energy means, and then we can go from there. Any takers?
I can certainly jump in, Jesse. So for me, transactive energy, it's really about monetizing this energy flexibility that I referred in my initial address here. This energy flexibility that is now possible to create at the consumer level. The digital world has really enabled the consumer and the prosumer to better understand the operational impact of their different processes, and this in real time. And it's now possible to imagine that, with the set of technology we've got, to being able to create or to reduce the energy consumption at the building level by 30 to 50% on, all the existing stock. And as we build new buildings, there is, that benchmark of being able to reduce the energy consumption of these buildings is very, very phenomenal. So really here, the transactive energy is how can we effectively monetize this energy flexibility, and how can we benefit from this? It obviously have a financial value. I believe as well it does have a social value, as I believe that this transactive energy can enable to really utilize that energy flexibility for the greater good of our societies, and really leverage this to create a more sustainable future. So, and for me, what is interesting to say as an initial statement here, I would say the prosumer ecosystem is ready for transactive energy. That's really something that maybe 5 years, 10 years ago, we didn't have this digital infrastructure that to enable the transactive energy. But now our consumer and as well prosumer, as we imagine that production now is we're capable of doing this production close to the load, is capable to contribute in this energy trading system. So.
Thanks, Frederick. Does anybody else want to add to that?
I'd be happy to chime in, and I'm glad that we're starting with this kind of foundational question, because it's almost like, what does sustainability mean, right? Like, it's one of these terms that everyone uses, but I think people define it really differently. I really like Frederick's definition that kind of talked about the value of the transaction. When we talk about transactive energy, for me, there's a peer-to-peer element. And trying to move away from the centralized model of just buying energy from utilities and generators. So to me, any energy transaction between two people in the grid that bypasses or doesn't necessarily include the utility would be an example of transactive energy. And you see a lot of software companies kind of jumping to, what they think is a solution, and, oh, well, blockchain is transactive energy and different types of things. Blockchain is a tool. It may or may not play a role. There can be a lot simpler versions. And in fact, in our pilot project, our vehicle to grid project, we have drivers of electric vehicles selling energy to building owners. That to me is transactive energy. We're doing a transaction that doesn't involve the utility, which hasn't really been done before. So I like to keep quite a general term for it, and generically think of it as peer-to-peer transactions of energy that don't necessarily require a system operator or utility, though it might as well, depending on the setup of it.
Can I just follow up with that with, I guess, sort of a question? It's interesting how Matt, you put that in terms of that peer-to-peer and thinking about, moving away from storage per se, but from the PPAs that are happening now. We've seen one or two in Ontario, and we're seeing a growth in Alberta, where they're moving away from buying and selling through traditional manners, and through the power purchase agreements, they're purchasing the energy that they want to electrify their plant. And going back to one of the, I think, Edward, you spoke about it with the ICI program, with the proliferation of storage, that isn't through a market, that's through a price signal. And that's companies reacting to that price signal. So I actually Googled transactive energy to prepare for this panel. And everything I read, I said, oh, okay, I understand it. But so I agree that, having that foundation and thinking outside of the box of the traditional wholesale market, and which is very exciting, and what I think the three of us, spend our day jobs doing week on and week after week.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Edward, did you want to chime in for this?
Yeah, please. Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Yeah, so I think to add the sort of the system operator's perspective is, and I think in many respects, this is where transactive energy does require that contextual discussion, even just to define it. I also, like Sarah, I also went back to some of the foundational documents from the Gridwise Architecture Council, going back to 2012, the paper that started it all, and they didn't try and define transactive energy until page 12, right? Until you sort of describe what is this complex notion of value exchange happening at every level of the system. And the only thing I would add here is, I think transactive energy not only does it have to facilitate the commercial flexibility of who the counterparties are, whether it's going through an intermediated market or bilateral type commercial transactions, but the only thing I have to add, I think, to Matt's argument, when you say the utility is not involved, there is still utility infrastructure that underlies that transaction. So at some level, there is a reliability coordination, which, again, wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention it, as a system operator that still has to overlay a transactive energy system, that somehow those transactions have to, at the very least, clear from a reliability standpoint, even though you may not necessarily have a centralized, organized market at the commercial layer that's underpinning that transaction. I think that is what makes it so difficult, is that different parties now are maybe involved in different aspects of a transaction and not necessarily holistically the way we do in a wholesale market. So today's wholesale market, in many ways, we meet the definition of transactive energy. We're pairing bids and offers and doing the reliability coordination and all of that. But I think where this gets really interesting down at the distribution level is that won't necessarily quite play that way in many respects, as you may have bilateral transactions, but still need a reliability coordinator to make sure the underlying infrastructure is protected and quite frankly benefits from this, that you can actually incent the right transactions to defer asset investment or spur new asset investment where it may be required in the system. And I think that, to me, in many respects, is something we're still trying to get right at the wholesale market level with the introduction of our capacity auction. Is we're still trying to figure out, how do I make sure that transactions also incent the right infrastructure and don't strand assets over the longer period of time. So there's a very complicated economic and operational problem that's intertwined in this that I think we want to make sure gets addressed. And to their credit, Gridwise Architecture Council, this is their starting point from 10 years ago, is to say we need something that's more comprehensive than just simply organizing a market. This is actually now to allow devices and commercial opportunities to sort of grow organically while ensuring the system infrastructure goes in some sort of coherent way.
May I add just a quick point?
Of course.
Yeah, I agree completely. You know, when I talk about peer-to-peer, some people in the energy spectrum, you know, might take an idealized view of a totally free market where anything can happen. I do not see that as the path. You need to have market rules, you need reliability, you need oversight. So I think there's a really important role for system operators. And one thing that to me is critical for transactive energy to be successful is stakeholder visibility, that everyone has visibility into not necessarily the value of the transaction, so that would be nice too, but the magnitude of the transactions, where energy is going, and how that affects reliability. So a really important role for the IESO or other system operators, and they have to kind of set the rules of the game that everyone else has to abide by.
Can I say, under this definition, could we use the distributor or the utility now as the peer-to-peer in how they procure their services and how they procure the energy or the capacity that they need for their system, how they meet their peaks? Because if that was part of the definition, your non-wires alternatives, your non-wires solutions, you're moving towards moving away from traditional infrastructure by procuring services. Could that, I think I would put that under transactive energy, which is different than, peer-to-peer outside of the normal traditional realm, but having the utilities now start to change the way that they act and they behave within the context of the franchise of their system.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, Sarah, of the role of the utility as well. Any comments on that before we move on? Okay, maybe we can move on then. So
I would just add, just to add to Sarah's point, is I think in many ways I think over the longer run, both of those paradigms have to be accommodated, where you potentially may have a utility as a buyer and seller of services and peer-to-peer. Mm-hmm. And speaking from our own experience of the wholesale market, we have a notion of bilateral transactions. Two of our market participants can remove themselves from the commercial layer in our marketplace and settle outside of our marketplace through a bilateral contractual transaction. But at the same time, as a system operator, we still have to make sure that the scheduling of those facilities still adheres to the physical constraints of the system. And a lot of commodity markets work that way around the world. People can price settle through the commodities exchange, or they can do alternative delivery procedures outside of the market. And I think quite frankly, this is the same kind of dynamic that we just haven't addressed in the electricity industry. And now we're running headlong into the same problem. We're going to need to have both types of commercial arrangements, especially as we get more sophisticated prosumers out there. Some people will be selling services to the utility companies, and sometimes it'll be to your next door neighbor, or combinations of both. And if there's an economic impetus behind that, then as the utility community, we better make sure that we're not standing in the way of those types of markets from forming.
Right. Thanks, Edward. Certainly, as there are more market participants, we can run the market much more efficiently. So we've talked about what is transactive energy. I wanted to move to why have transactive energy. And Frederick, you did mention a bit about the social value for transactive energy, but I wanted to give all four of you a chance to talk about, what's the purpose of transactive energy? Why do we have it? What's the problem we're trying to solve? And the flip side of that is, what are some of the pitfalls of transactive energy? Does anybody want to start with this one?
I can again jump in on this one. You know, when I look at it, what I like to say is that the future is electric, and the future will be greener and will need to be more sustainable. And all the projections are showing that the consumption of electricity will double in the next 20 years, going from 20% today to 40%. So it's a massive increase of the use of electricity as an energy source, while the other source of energy will pretty flat or going down. So this offers a great deal of opportunity. Now, the way we have been building our electrical infrastructure to meet this increase in demand of electricity, I don't think we can afford the same approach as we have taken in the past in building massive generating infrastructure and transmission lines and so on. I think we've got now a technology that reshape and offer a great opportunity for the collective us to really being able to leverage this energy efficiency that can be generated and the space that I was referring at earlier at the building level. And as well, the emergence of prosumer, where battery storage, PVs are more accessible now, being able to enable this more generation capacity closer to the loads, I think it's changing the game. And this peer-to-peer energy transaction is a way to free up this capacity and really to enable us to build the energy infrastructure of tomorrow. And especially, as I said, the future is going to be electric. So it's a great opportunity for probably an industry which has been very reliable and solid for the past 100 years. It's going to be going through a massive change in the years to come, which offers to all of us in the industry a great deal of opportunity. So.
Thanks, Frederick. Anyone else?
I think a good reason to do it is just, for the value for ratepayer. As Frederick just mentioned, are we going to start building these large assets? I think some companies want to and are in the process of trying to do that. But isn't that the right idea for the ratepayer? What if we can unlock, Frederick mentioned this earlier as well, the flexibility that exists within Ontario right now, whether it be buildings, whether it be capacity from behind the meter storage, whether it is load curtailment activities. There's this range of capacity that sits within Ontario right now that can be unleashed and can be unlocked that has actually already been paid for and been paid for other reasons. And so if it's already paid for, then there must be a cost-effective way to take that flexibility, to take that capacity through demand response, through your behind the meter storage, through your changes to production levels that is changing how you use your facilities, how you use your mechanisms within your factory, say, on a daily basis that will decrease the peak. And so it's these made in Ontario solution. I think imports are extremely important and the import market needs to thrive, but let's look at what we actually have within each province or within each state, if anyone's from elsewhere, and try to grasp that capacity, because it should be more cost effective. And the analysis can be done to ensure that. And in the end, that gets back to ratepayer value and ensuring we're finding the most cost-effective, reliable resources that can participate in the grids, on the grids, in the end for the ratepayer.
Go ahead, Matt. Yeah.
I just want to build off of that, because I really liked your comment about cost effectiveness. And I look at that, so again, agreeing completely, just through a slightly different lens of asset utilization, right? That there's kind of an inevitability of this because people are, these new technologies are coming and people are investing in them for different reasons. Again, going back to electric vehicles, people will be buying them for transportation purposes. But if they aren't managed properly, the growth of demand from electric vehicles could break the grid. So you need some type of incentive to ensure that there's appropriate, charging, and then the technology exists. So why not allow discharging? if you're paying for that asset and you have it sitting there in your home or parked at work, you might as well use it to provide grid services, and the capacity and energy from a fleet of transportation vehicles is more than nuclear generating stations. It has a huge potential impact at marginal cost because they're buying it for different reasons. So the effectiveness and the efficiency of these models, I think, aren't to be underestimated. One last kind of point, you know, going back to kind of what's going on here on the big level, we're seeing this transition from the centralized model to the decentralized model, where people have the ability to buy energy like they're used to, fine, produce energy with solar, store energy in batteries, and ideally sell energy back to the grid. So with that perspective, you have this, you know, very networked grid with multi-dimensional flows, with very sophisticated transactions. And to me, that speaks to the necessity of software to help to manage this. We need, there's just too much going on otherwise. So the importance of having software controls or software visibility to help manage and understand the potential for these transactions.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Edward, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. So I think the other thing I would add to the why question, and this is probably an expansion on what Matthew is talking about, is, yeah, there is a huge logistical problem presented by sheer volume of DERs that we're going to have entering the market over the next few years. I'm speaking to you today from our system control center, and on the floor below me right now are the servers running the only optimization engine in the province of Ontario right now, insofar as utilities are concerned. And we're optimizing wholesale assets. Our computer systems right now are working on the 1:35 p.m. dispatch as I speak, hopefully. And but when I start to think about now pulling in an optimization problem that involves everyone's thermostat, everyone's electric vehicle, everyone's distribution infrastructure problem, I simply won't have a building big enough or enough computing firepower to solve that optimization problem, even if I could overcome the network latency problems that go with it. And I think one of the companies that did an extraordinary paper on this 8 years ago, Cisco Systems, they've been involved in the transactive energy with GridWise for so many years. They observed that this problem we're running into is very similar to the same problem they have with internet routing traffic, is have to delegate the optimization problem down to lower levels of the system. The computer system in your house may be part of the optimization engine. Your local utility company may be part of the optimization engine. The wholesale grid operator does the regional optimization. So transactive energy has to happen in a number of stratas in the system. This problem is going to be just simply too big in scale for any one organization to optimize for. And I think that alone, even if you had a question about the economic question, is just logistically about handling an Internet of Things and ensuring you can still safely run a power grid. We're going to have delegated authority in the system that we quite frankly haven't had before. And that's another thing that I think almost makes this topic inevitable, regardless of what policymakers may think at the moment. Once we get bigger and bigger numbers of controllable assets out there, this problem will become too big for anyone in our industry to ignore.
Great. Thank you all. So that we heard many different reasons for having transactive energy: economic, environmental or sustainable, flexibility, among others. I'd be curious to know from you if you could share any case studies or examples of either energy storage projects or transactive energy style case studies where it can demonstrate some of the benefits that we've just talked about. Matthew's nodding. Do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I mean, just because this is where we live, right? So we participate in the IESO demand response program, which has so many different levels. Sometimes demand response can be quite straightforward. There's no forecasting involved. You get a signal, you respond to it. But in January, we responded to a demand response signal with a multi-asset virtual power plant. So we had 8 buildings, 4 of which had batteries, 2 of which had electric vehicles, 12 electric vehicles, and 2 of which had manual load curtailment. And our software is able to provide a consistent 1 megawatt over 4 hours. So that's kind of, if you broaden out from that, use your imagination a little bit to say, well, what else could you do if you could harness that power? right? A demand response is relatively straightforward, but you could do the same thing for frequency regulation or for other grid needs and services by harnessing the power of all of these different assets that are already out in the field. So again, kind of playing to that theme of using software to optimize multiple different asset types to provide reliability and visibility. If you don't have the reliability, it just doesn't work.
One program, or I like to call it the DR market in Ontario, Matt, just from a language standpoint. But one program that does exist that we participate is in New York, and it's the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management. And this one I recommend just Googling BQDM, Brooklyn Queens Demand Management. It's basically dealing with, obviously in New York City, there is not a lot of space to put new infrastructure. And so they went out and looked for non-wires alternatives. And they were able to defer, it was a $1.2 billion spend they figured out with traditional infrastructure investments. And they ended up being able to, they were using $200 million basically by procuring these services, procuring what Matt just explained, whether it be from buildings, whether it be, I don't think any EVs are in that one yet, but you know, it's these, what's on the rooftops, what's in the parking lots, and able to solve this problem. And so that's one that I would recommend looking up, because it's an excellent webpage with each procurement they have in each level. The other one is the York, I'm not sure if it was spoken today because I missed a part of the session that Nitika from Electra was moderating. I jumped in near the halfway point, but the ISO York region non-wires alternative pilot project, I think is, you know, this ability of a local energy market that's procured through a local capacity auction, which I think Edward was getting at, that we need to, you know, move this optimization down from the central and have it more decentralized. So the that York region demo project, I think, will have a lot of neat lessons learned. And hopefully, you know, this is a program that can be run for just more than the 1 year that's stated, or 2 years that's stated right now, to solve some of these low growth, not problems, they're good things to increase demand, but to solve the problems the utility may be having because of the load growth in the York region. So that's the IESO non-wires alternative in York region, which also is very Googleable.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for those two examples. Edward or Frederick, do you have any
Sure, yeah, thanks, Jesse. So maybe I'll just, just expand on the York region. Thank you, Sarah, for mentioning that. You know, I think the other thing we're thinking about the ISO beyond the demonstration project is, so we're trying to harness DERs to help solve a transmission level problem, but also be harmonious with the local distribution infrastructure as well, which is where the partnership with Electra becomes so important. But the interesting problem that this is starting to raise is that middle layer between DERs and the wholesale market. There is going to need to be a system coordination layer. I don't have a view of any transmission lines below 50,000 volts. So what we call an LDC today may have to potentially evolve to become some sort of either system operator or platform operator type entity to allow access to the infrastructure and ensure the same kind of reliability decisions that we make at the wholesale market level. We may need some essence of that at the distribution level. And so the other thing we've done at the ISO is we released a series of discussion papers looking at different models of the transmission distribution interface. And we've examined examples across Europe and in some of the United States as well. And again, we don't have an official position as to what form the distribution sector should evolve to. That is definitely beyond our jurisdiction, but we want to start the conversation, because that is the missing layer that, again, when we talk to our colleagues all across North America in the system operator community, as we're all working on the problem of how to get aggregated DERs into the wholesale market. But we still have to mediate between the wholesale market needs and what's happening at the distribution level. What happens if I need to ramp down a solar array because we have an overgeneration problem in the wholesale grid, but that might potentially then cause a local infrastructure problem if I do that, where there is no intermediary right now at the moment to sort of examine which of those two transactions has a higher value. And this is exactly the kind of problem that Transactive Energy could and should speak to in the future. But who organizes that? And that to me is a first order question for our industry that a conversation we're trying to start. We have a series of white papers on our website right now. Again, just to start, again, it's not our purview to decide that as the wholesale market operator, but we definitely want to see action on that problem over the next few years. Somewhere, somehow, someone's going to have to be in charge of the middle layer of transactive energy at the distribution infrastructure level.
Thanks, Edward. Frederick, did you want to add any examples or case studies?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can imagine, we have hundreds of microgrid application and case studies across Canada and North America that are in one shape or form a good representation. And as Matt said in the introduction of not the very complex transactive energy, but very foundational transactive energy project. One project that would be a good representative of that is the project we've done with Electra for the Markham Civic Centers, which has been a challenge of integration of EV, electrical vehicle, into an existing building. But I wanted to share with you another case study, which I think is a good representation. As I was hearing all of the challenge we had been discussing up to now, the big challenge we're facing is how to orchestrate this energy trading. And as Matt said at the beginning, the peer-to-peer. So we're not traveling so much these days, but let me offer you a trip to Thailand. So we're working on a big transactive energy project in Thailand with EGAT at their headquarters in Bangkok. And the objective of this project is exactly to develop this peer-to-peer energy trading system. Of course, yeah, we're going to use as a main technology like blockchain technology to enable this building trade, right, between each other, to being able to trade this excess of energy production between each other. So we're working on this project with IBM. They're bringing their energy trading and the blockchain platform. We're also working with Energy Pool, is a Schneider Electric company that is orchestrating the DR operation, the energy aggregation, and very important one, the peer-to-peer billing, which is in the mix of what we're trying to work there. And Schneider Electric here, we're providing the microgrid control, because there is one thing we cannot compromise is on the quality of the electrical distribution, and eventually as well the quality of the energy that is put back on the grid, right? So that's something we cannot compromise. So we're providing the microgrid solution, the analytics on the energy management, the energy forecasting, and very importantly here, as I said at the beginning, we're working on the load control, being able to offset the HVAC system to create that space to being able to make that transaction. So, the good thing here is that our technology of microgrid is ready to make it happen, where our system is ready to connect with this energy trading system. There's a lot at stake here, and what I feel being super interesting here is that, as you understand in our panel discussion, there's a lot to learn, a lot to discover, and then from this Schneider Electric and I believe the other parties on this project, we're going to learn a lot on how to create the right incentive, the right stability of the grid, but as well how can this trade could be efficient and being really a win-win between the building owners and then the utilities in that trade. So
great, thank you all for very interesting examples, both locally and internationally. So now that we've heard a bit about how transactive energy or energy storage looks like today, I'd like to take the conversation to what it can look like tomorrow and in the future. And if I'd be curious to hear from each of you on what would this world look like once transactive energy matures and we get the full benefits from it. Would anybody like to start?
I'm happy to go. So the example that I'll give is, don't take it literally, but as a figurative example, I think it can be pretty telling. We like to think of the changes in the energy market to start to look more and more like a stock market with real time and perhaps locational pricing. And so, we're all familiar with the typical model of consumers buying energy from utilities or generators. But with transactive energy, you can kind of flip it on its head. And so we envision a stock market where the buyers are the utilities and the system operators, but they're buying energy services. And that can be capacity reductions or frequency regulation or other services to help balance the grid. And the sellers are the owners of the distributed energy resources. So anyone that owns a battery or a solar or even an electric vehicle or even their building. So it's kind of this vision of a clearinghouse, but flipping the traditional model on its head, where anyone has the ability to sell energy services to utilities or system operators that are looking to purchase that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah,
So
Sarah.
I'll expand on that because I think that was a great future that we see. But it is just, you know, the more opening up of markets and the ability to have these resources actually participate, and you know, maybe moving a bit away from transactive energy, but you know, having a technology agnostic approach to this procurement of services. And here's the problem, and you can solve it. And I think the looking south of the border under the FERC regulated markets, you know, they have FERC 841, which I think was mentioned earlier, FERC 2222, you know, and these participation models where the ISOs or the RTOs have to enable participation of these type of distributed resources. And it was great to hear Edward in his speech, you know, talk about how even though we're not a FERC jurisdiction, they're, you know, following what's happening there from, you know, and hoping to ensure that our system is able to do similar things that can be done under the FERC jurisdiction. So, you know, expanding participation in operating reserves is something that I speak about all the time in the ISO stakeholder sessions, allowing more resources to be able to provide that service. They can do it in other markets. We do it in Alberta through aggregated load, aggregated DERs. We can do that in Alberta. We can do that in ISO New England, but we can't do it in ISO Ontario. And I hope it's not a philosophical reason why we can't do that. It's not a philosophical barrier. It's a software you know, tool barrier that the ISO has. And so as the ISO through this storage design project, sorry, you know, and what was great about seeing that was what are the barriers and what tools need to change to enable this participation. So in my future of transactive energy, it's similar to as Matt explained it, and that these is all open to anyone who can actually provide this service in a cost-effective, reliable way. And if it's done through a market, then you know that you're getting the best price if they're able to follow the technical rules which need to be in place from the reliability standpoint.
Thanks, Sarah. Frederick or Edward? Oh, we can't hear you, Frederick.
Yes, I was on mute, yes, of course. As you heard me, I'm quite optimistic about the future for those of us that are in the electrical industry. It is quite a bright future ahead, where it is going to offer a lot of opportunities for our industry. Though, as we talked, this energy trading is a complex system to crack. But what gives me, and as well, I think it was Edward that said that it's not something that one company would be able to solve. So it offers again a great opportunity, and we've seen other industry that have been able to, you know, reinvent itself, especially when it comes to go to market, which we got to find the right win-win there. And we've seen these other industry again that have been able to create that circular economy with different paradigm and then being able to find the right spot. But I'm very optimistic because there is a lot of opportunities for us to tap in, and as well, I think it's not far in the future now that if I can make a parallel with the residential market, which will offer as well in the transactive energy, I believe, a space for us to leverage. We've seen the introduction in the last 10 years of the smart thermostat, which were, I think, you know, a first good wave of technology that shift the way and created that energy flexibility that I mentioned earlier. But I think it's where the future is very close, where the panel that we have at our house is going to change the way we have seen this gray box in our houses, and where this smart energy panel will have supported by AI, the capacity to integrate natively renewable battery energy storage, being able to forecast the energy usage, and being able to participate to this energy trading on the grid. And again, when I look at the position we have in Canada from an energy profile standpoint, the great framework of university and technology asset we've got across the country, I strongly believe Canada can play a big role in this transactive energy, and to create wealth for the country. But if I close my eyes and I look in the future, this for us in Canada, it's probably offering us a big opportunity to create enough energy flexibility and capacity, and why not to sell energy to our neighbor on the south, which will be in demand of green energy and capacity to support as well their economy. So I think that's really an opportunity for us to reinvest money back in the future of Canada. So.
Yeah, thanks, Frederick. Edward, did you want to add anything for future transactive energy?
Yeah, I think to all of these, I think I would add two more challenges that transactive energy has to overcome in order to get to that successful future. And so I think one is the first one is, I think, to make sure that the transaction costs of transaction energy get to a point where it actually is worthwhile in the value proposition. I think that's something that industry still has to demonstrate. I mean, we're working on that with pilot projects and that sort of thing, but I think ultimately what will get us there is converging on a common standard of implementation worldwide. And there's a lot of really good work happening on that front right now. The U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology just released their smart grid interoperability framework in July of this year, which has been a massive 10-year undertaking to catalog the underlying communication standards that will help facilitate transactive energy. And ultimately, as you get economies of scale, of course, is the other thing that lowers transaction costs as well. Just sheer numbers of participants itself will be one of the things that will help improve the viability of transactive energy and make it a worthwhile solution to implement. And then I think the other one is, when you look past these sort of grandiose predictions of, whether it's changes to supply mix, a more decentralized power grid, the other thing that's caught up in that is a multi-billion-dollar stranded asset problem. And having lived through that with our wholesale market deregulation 20 years ago, and quite frankly, still living with the legacy of the Ontario Hydro debt, I would say that somehow transactive energy is also going to have to price in stranded asset costs to make sure that our transition from the present infrastructure to whatever that bright future is done in a coherent way. And I think there's a huge problem that's laid at the feet of policymakers and regulators. This is where transactive energy is going to need an organizing influence. It's more than just pilot projects to demonstrate technical feasibility. It's to make sure the actual control knobs and what gets priced into a transactive energy price makes sense for the infrastructure itself. And I think, again, just having lived through that with our wholesale market experience, I think there's quite frankly an even bigger problem lying at the distribution level that we haven't even started a conversation about yet, and we're going to have to solve it. I think it can be solved. I think the good news is actually I think transactive energy is an important tool to help solve that transition problem that we're going to have to make in the 21st century. But that's a big mountain to climb, and quite frankly, those conversations still have yet to begin.
Great, thanks. Actually, that's an excellent segue to the next question. I'll ask one more question before we take questions from the audience. So I see that there are some questions coming in through the Q&A. If you guys can keep that coming in, we will get to that very, very shortly. But I wanted to talk to you about research. We have the NESNet. This conference is hosted by NESNet, which is also an acronym within an acronym. It's the NSERC Energy Storage Technology Network. And we have lots of attendees who are researchers across Canada, around the world. I was wondering if you could highlight any potential research areas you think are very promising to help us get to this future with transactive energy that you've just told us about. And I think, Edward, you've talked about a couple of more practical I guess, barriers or challenges we have to overcome. Is there anything that the research community can help you with to move transactive energy forward? Anybody want to go first?
And I think, first of all, the answer is it already is. And as Jesse will know, and is that we're actually funding a transactive energy research chair at Ryerson University to do just that. And we've been, I think together we've been attacking the problem from a number of different levels, both at the technical level, a mid-level market optimization type problem level, and then also at a policy issue in terms of looking at the issues. And NestNet actually has a whole branch of NestNet that's actually just looking at the policy implications of energy storage. And I think in many ways we have to go through a similar exercise with transactive energy. I think in many ways the energy storage, distributed energy storage problem bleeds into the transactive energy problem. There's not really a clear boundary where one begins or ends. And I think that to me is a huge frontier where NestNet can take its future work into as we get into this is what does that middle layer look like? What are the organizing influences? And how do you make sure that the economics of transactive energy, don't stifle private investment, but also serve the common good, including the infrastructure that the ratepayers already spent 100 years investing in?
Thanks, Edward. Anybody else on potential research areas in this section?
Just due to where I spend my day-to-day, is in the regulatory, within the regulatory framework, and from a regulatory standpoint, the rules that it will enable this to be done, that will enable utilities to open up from their traditional cost of service rate applications to be able to make use on, let's say, a small scale in the near future of these resources, and then down the road, once we figured out stranded assets and those items that were identified by Edward, how to enable this further. And so, there's, I think, we do a lot of work in our innovation hubs that we have, one in California, one in Boston, that are open and public, and we want people to join us in those innovation hubs. So please, it's an L Innovation Hub. Please look it up. And we've just partnered with another organization in Toronto to launch the third one in North America. But so much of that is from a technical software standpoint, where we're struggling with the regulatory, the rate impacts, the rate changes that are needed. This is demonstrated with the cost allocation question out of the ICI and the Global Adjustment. I don't like using the word issue or challenge that is being faced right now in Ontario, or has been faced over pretty much the entire length of its existence. So, I think there's lots of nuts we got to crack in the regulatory world under the traditional regulatory construct to bring this forward. So anything on that, I'm always interested in reading.
Yeah, Matthew, go ahead.
So Jesse, I mean, energy touches every aspect of our lives. So are there areas for research? Yes. I mean, it's economic, it's technical, it's battery degradation, it's software, there's regulatory, there's so many threads that you can pull that all go in the same direction. So I want to bring up something that I think sometimes is overlooked. I think that often in the energy space, we don't talk enough about the social impacts of this transition. And again, building off of Edward's comments of stranded assets and the cost effectiveness, people are familiar, many people, with the idea of the utility death spiral, or the concept of it, whether it happens in reality or not. I think it's overblown somewhat, but the idea that people may disengage or defect from the grid, but the costs of maintaining the grid then have to be split among fewer people. So then the costs go up for them. So then the cost effectiveness of defecting from the grid is more attractive. So more people leave, costs go up, and it continues in that cycle. The important part that I want to draw attention to, though, is the people that can afford to defect from the grid are the wealthier people, the wealthier companies. And that means that the people that are left to cover the costs are going to be the most marginalized people and the people that can least afford to. And again, I don't believe in the full-blown utility death spiral, but elements of it will happen. And I think we need to be really conscious of the social impacts of what would happen if only wealthy people can afford to invest in DERs, and the people that can't afford it are left covering the burden of maintaining the rest of it. So I think we need to really research that and mechanisms to ensure that this transition is done in a fair way, that that those costs are considered right from the start.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. It's an excellent point. And I mean, we're seeing this now during COVID and the pandemic and all the cracks that it's exposing in terms of disparities in access to opportunities. Frederick, did you want to add anything on the research question?
Yeah, on the research side, I have to say that we're very satisfied with the partnership we have. It's a good representation, by the way, the partnership we have created with Ryerson and the creation of the Smart Grid Lab that has been really delivering concrete output that are all bits and pieces of element that we collectively need to put our effort to solve. You know, today I brought you to the other side of the world in Thailand with this, this project we're doing, but I would wish that we'd being able to create such kind of infrastructure here where we would be able to create this collaboration among different, companies to really look at it from this angle of the peer-to-peer and how can we really find the right, infrastructure to create the stability of the grid, but the financial flow, which is creating the win-win. So yeah, there's a lot to do, a lot of space, and as I said, the future is bright for the electrical industry. So.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I see there have been some questions that came in from our audience. I'll try to get through as many of them as possible, and I might combine a few that are similar. But the first one is, what state or countries are at the forefront of transactive energy systems and peer-to-peer energy transactions? And if I can, exercise my moderator's privileges and add the corollary to that, what can other jurisdictions learn from us here in Ontario and in Canada? Any takers?
I mean, I don't mind getting into this because, of course, for us, it's a question of economics and where we can make the most money. I would say, first off, kudos to the IESO. Ontario is a leader in this. Ontario really is got a lot of innovative pilot projects and a lot of innovative mechanisms that I think are being watched from around the world. New York has a program called Rev Connect, or Rev Reforming the Energy Vision, which is, again, quite progressive. FERC Order 2222 across the US, seeing how that unfolds will be really interesting. And then some other countries have had some stutter starts. If you look at Japan, for example, they've started to, deregulate energy markets, but it looks like the full, potential of transactive energy is still years away there. Australia is one that does seem to be happening quite quickly, but it's almost a Wild West in some ways, it seems. It's an anything goes market. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. New York versus California are two interesting comparisons. New York has been slower to develop, but they're really spending the time to establish appropriate rules of the game through market mechanisms, whereas California appears that they're much quicker out of the gate, but it was more state-defined targets and demand response programs, which are, again, not quite as innovative or progressive, but they're getting the job done in terms of promoting DERs. So those are just some of the examples off the top of my head that I can think of.
I'd say for Enel, it's interesting where we want to invest is the same, where the revenue opportunities exist. And Ontario is number one, because of the ICI program, the Industrial Conservation Incentive, which, just for those who aren't as familiar, it's a demand charge program that has large consumers over 1 megawatt able to chase peaks and therefore have their share of the global adjustment, which is the top up to the wholesale energy market price to pay for the capacity that we've procured. And why, as I said in my one of the first responses I did was why we like it is it's because it's a pure price signal. It's not a market rule. It's not. There's no barriers other than just following a price signal. And so it's actually this actually freeing ability to participate. Granted, it could be done tomorrow on a government decision, so there's massive risks, but there's a massive payback and all the benefits that it's actually giving to the grid when those large consumers come off 5-10 times a year and really drive down the peak. Which this summer, when the program was on hiatus, we had two EEA events that haven't happened in years, as I can recall. The other markets, California, Massachusetts, and New York, our business there is based on the subsidies that exist, which once again are also based on government decisions. So they're there right now, but they may not be there tomorrow. And so it's whether you follow the free market price signal of Ontario versus chasing the subsidization of the deployment of DERs to meet RPS, resource standards, portfolio standards, or based on government governors' decisions. So that's where we're investing, because that's where we can right now make the returns.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Edward, did you?
Yeah, Jesse. So the other areas that I would say are where there's interesting fertile ground for transactive energy to develop is in a number of jurisdictions across Europe. Europe has had a long-standing rule for distribution utility companies that if they have more than 100,000 customers, they're required to separate out the wires business and the distribution system operator business into two separate businesses to provide open access. So this goes back to early days of deregulation in the early 2000s. And that rule alone is not transactive energy in itself, but it does create fertile ground. It does, as transactive energy, as this concept takes off, a lot of jurisdictions in Europe are very fertile ground for them because you already have open access to the distribution market through an independent entity that doesn't own the wires, or at least two functions have been separated out. With today in what we call an LDC here in Ontario, those two things are combined into one entity. So that'll be very interesting to see over the next few years if transactive energy takes hold faster. And indeed, there are a number of jurisdictions, particularly in the Nord Pool service area, where you see some very advanced and widespread transactive energy projects happen, really going beyond project to mainstream participation. United Kingdom has very similar rules where wires and distribution system operations are separated. And again, some very innovative transactive energy type programs taking hold on a large scale there as well. And then finally, to Matt's point on FERC Order 2222, I think that could be a crucible for a much more sophisticated conversation about transactive energy. As we start to allow mass numbers of DERs into the wholesale market, it's really going to highlight that there's still this middle layer problem that hasn't been solved yet. So even though that may not have been the intention to talk about transactive energy explicitly in FERC Order 2222, it's leading a lot of US jurisdictions down to that path where that's going to become a burning platform, I think, over the next few years as well. And I think we'll have a lot to learn from how that plays out over the next few years.
Frederick, did you want to add anything to this one?
Not particularly but just to probably complement that from Schneider Electric, what the panelists have shared in terms of opportunities. We are seeing the same demand and the fertile ground, as you mentioned, Edward, is where we see the same demand for this additional of DER in California, on the northeast of the US, as well as Europe, and some part of Asia as well, as I said. So I think what this international overview that I've been getting through the Schneider lens is that in Canada, yes, the cost of energy is very low compared to many other areas. There is different pressure on the grid in the other part of the world that are not the same that what we are seeing here in Canada. But yes, clearly in the same space that has been described, we are seeing demand from our customers. So.
Great, thank you all. So I'm going to combine three questions because they're kind of similar to try and get through as many as we can, but they're all around the future of transactive energy systems and how different elements can play a role in that. And some of the elements that are mentioned include on-demand hydrogen production, quantum batteries, prosumers, and aggregators. So would you be able to comment on the role of any of those four functions or others if you want in the future of transactive energy systems? Yeah, go for it.
I'll give it a go. That's kind of broad, but I'll do my best. You know, I can't comment too much on the hardware aspect, quantum batteries or hydrogen. You know, it's easier for us to talk about the DERs because it's physical and people can understand what we're discussing. But it's not really about the physical hardware. That's going to come and go. It's about the regulatory structure, and I believe about the software to enable these transactions. If you have the right price signals, different technologies can come and participate in those markets. So sure, could be quantum batteries, could be lithium, could be something else, could be hydrogen. If you have the right mechanisms, it should be technology agnostic. We shouldn't be picking a favorite. We shouldn't be trying to lead the market because that's the flavor of the month. And there's some work being done with concepts like, I might get the name wrong, I'm sorry, but universal participation models, where they set the rules of energy markets in such a way to be more agnostic, to allow different technologies to participate no matter what their constraints are. In terms of the role of aggregators and what particular changes in the future I think will have the most impact, aggregators are necessary from a visibility perspective. The system operators, at least currently, just don't have visibility into assets. I'm not exactly sure the threshold. I'm going to say 1 megawatt. Ed can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But they just don't have visibility into these smaller, micro assets. So if you want to have home residential batteries or electric vehicle participating, you either need a more robust software platform or you need aggregators to manage that. In terms of what I think will be the biggest game changer, ubiquitous electric vehicles. I mean, mainly because it's a free energy asset, because people buy cars for transportation reasons, but the asset utilization is less than 5%. 95% of the time, a car just sits there. So if you can use that 95% of what you've already paid for to provide new services, you can significantly reduce the overall cost of grid management if you can do it properly with visibility and reliability. Two big ifs.
I think just following up with that said, the role of aggregators is so key, and it's one thing for our company to aggregate 220 different companies across Ontario to provide 100 megawatts. It's another thing for a company such as Energy Hub or what Nest is doing with their residential thermostats. You have to aggregate 10,000 of those houses. Sarah Griffiths, the ratepayer, is one thing to put a switch on my air conditioner and pay me $25. It's another to actually manage that with the sophistication that exists now through meters, which it's easy for them if they have the ability to access that data. And so it'll make it, whether it's the distributor or the ISO, imagine having to deal with 10,000 different houses with bids and offers. So, being able to take that big number, and then also on behalf of the homeowner or behalf of the commercial industrial, the aggregator is the market participant and takes on that risk. And so a company that we have a customer that's a massive apple orchard and makes most of the apple juice that anybody will drink across Canada. They're not energy manager. They don't follow forecasts. They can use an app on their phone to do stuff within their factory to follow a dispatch, but they don't want that to be their full-time job. They don't want to pay someone that full-time job. So that ability to have the market sophistication, the market access, and take on the risk will, no matter whether you're in a wholesale market or a retail program with a distributor, the aggregator can afford the software to optimize all of it versus every single building in Toronto having to do that on their own.
Thanks, Sarah. Edward, did you?
Yeah, so Jesse, I just at a high level, I would observe, the opportunity and the danger of that question you posed in the sense of the different technologies. I think to Matt's point, the pure economic view is to set a transactive energy pricing model to neutral, where all of these different technologies can compete to be brought to bear on an infrastructure problem. That's the I think most economists would agree that would be the pure implementation of it. But I think the other thing that's been mentioned in this panel has been the notion to what extent social policy goals come into this, because transactive energy also creates a potential new control lever that policymakers didn't have before to favor different policy objectives that may not be routed in pure economics. You know, in the history of this industry, our rates have been used to promote rural electrification in the 1930s. More recently, it's been used to abate greenhouse gas emissions. And now transactive energy actually will give you a much more precise and finely tuned tool to promote whatever objectives may be emerge over the course of the 21st century. And I think it's an extension of a very old challenge in our industry. To what extent does social policy creep into the notion of how electricity is bought and sold, or in rate structures and so forth? And I think, again, we're only seeing the very beginnings of these conversations. I think are ultimately going to make it to the policymaker level at some point as to how you're going to use this new control lever that we're potentially about to build.
Edward, sorry, I just have to jump in because it's such an important point, but I'm surprised you didn't mention industrial subsidies.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. No, very true. Very true. Yes.
The ICI program
For sure,
is an
yes.
industrial incentive.
That's right.
And we're piggybacking on it. I mean,
That's
Sarah
right.
and I, our companies are taking advantage of an existing mechanism that wasn't made for DERs.
Yeah.
And so you're starting to see that friction this year, again, exacerbated because of COVID. The program wasn't made for what we're making it do. And that's gonna have ramifications. There has to be some kind of reckoning there.
Oh,
Well,
absolutely.
slow down a bit, you know. I think reckoning's a bit a tough word, and the word subsidy is not correct either, but I'll just leave it at that.
Frederick, did you want to jump in on this? No, that's okay. So we have 3 minutes. I'm going to try and bundle together 3 questions as well, and they all revolve around the scale or size of a transactive energy market participant. And the questions, I'll try to pull out the key elements of the questions, but one is asking about the ROI that's required for to make a transactive energy project viable. And there's projects that range from a couple hundred kilowatts to several megawatts. What's the scale range that you need to make it work? And there's another question that's along the same lines about the minimum threshold suitable for the Ontario Power Grid for DER. So that's a similar question. And the third one is around the utilities having visibility and control. The amount of visibility and control that the utilities need in order to let a transactive energy project participate. So would any of you have comments on the scale that's necessary for a project to participate?
I think I can start. You know, I think this is the beauty of this is that you're not talking about 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt, 3 megawatt projects. You can be, you know, 100 kilowatts. That's the minimum size requirement for participation in most wholesale markets across North America now, except for Ontario and except for Alberta. So again, getting that size down, the ISO non-wires alternative in York region actually has a 100 kilowatt size. So, you know, that the minimum size should be smaller to have access to the value of the DERs that exist in Ontario. But how, you know, there's still, not every homeowner or small business wants to participate. So sometimes size does matter, but from minimum size, you know, I think we all need to be striving for at least, you know, 100 kilowatts. And I can't remember now any of the other questions, so I'll leave it to my panelists.
I would just say I'm, you know, ambitiously would like to push that further. A residential home has a peak load less than 10 kilowatts, right? Sometimes less than 5 kilowatts. So if you want to unleash the power of every home in the country, you know, why should there be any threshold at all if you have aggregators and if you have the software capabilities? So if you want EVs, they have chargers typically between 7 to 30 kilowatts right now. Residential power walls are 15 kilowatts. So I'd love to see it not have any threshold, but just have aggregators and software do the heavy lifting of managing those thousands of devices.
Baby steps, baby
Baby
steps. Let's
steps.
get
We'll
to
get
100 first.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I
Any
also see the opportunity as Matt as to unleash the power. There is the capacity to have the all the residential market and the small building owners that could participate into this, and it's usually a quite a simple load and relatively easy to forecast as well. So that should be as well a good source of flexibility to being able to tap in there. So yeah.
Sure. Edward, did you want to have the last word?
Yeah, I'll just mention, the only thing I think just try and remind myself about, just when we think about these sort of size threshold type problems, is transactive energy happens at multiple levels of abstraction, right? So I have visibility and control as a grid operator down to lines with 50,000 volts. So really then whatever the aggregation is that's cheap enough to bring up to represent at that level of whether it's at a substation to the transmission system, if you can do that economically, then that's your threshold of size, is what can I actually aggregate to actually still have meaningful participation in the wholesale market and make the business case. But again, there's another level down below, as I could potentially now have individual feeders contributing to a distribution system where the threshold could be even lower. And then within a microgrid, I could have individual houses and businesses competing with a threshold even lower. And then at a given moment in time, having transactive energy to decide, how do I come up with that 2 kilowatts of loading relief my house has to provide to the grid? You can actually have a transactive energy type interaction between devices in the house. That transactive energy, as described in the Gridwise Alliance, plays out at each level of the system. And I think it will take the time for the economics to figure out what those thresholds are, but we should be flexible enough to allow those thresholds to continuously fall as we get greater economies of scale, cheaper technology. And I think this is really to Matt's point, is that we should allow the threshold to fall as the economics allow it to. If we've really got this right, then eventually there should be no lower limit to this. Eventually, individual internet connected devices in your house can compete with each other, all in the background and at no incremental cost to the consumer, basically. I think that is the ultimate prize here, is to make sure that we don't have to constrain ourselves with some artificial factor. It may take us a long time to get there, but the economics of this is what should guide the threshold. So at the end of the day, if we got this right.
Great, thank you. Thank you all, and in sharing what that ultimate prize will look like. That's a very good note to end on, so we know which direction we want to head. But thank you so much, Edward, Matthew, Frederick, Sarah. This has been a fun and fascinating discussion. We are moving to our break time, I believe, until 2:45, when we will have our last session, session 4, to wrap up the conference for today.